Welcome back, everybody, to the Sellbetter Daily Sales Show, where we bring you daily sales advice to help you sell better. You're here to learn all about increasing your win rate with better discovery questions. And we have two experts in the room with us. Sophie Allen, the founder of Trampoline. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, James. It's an honor.
Indeed. And then my man, Troy Munson. This is your third Sell Better show. Welcome back, my friend.
Thanks for having me. I must be doing something right. You keep inviting me, man. You keep
Hey, you
inviting
missed
me.
me, right? I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Scan this QR code, check us out, sellbetter.xyz, figure out why we're doing this stuff. It's for you. It's the people that are on the front lines and your leaders that need to help enable you to be successful. I want to give a big shout out to our partners over at ZoomInfo. We have been using data tools for years. None of them come close to the quality of data and the constant improvement efforts that ZoomInfo has shown us. We trust it. We use it every single day. We highly recommend it to all of our clients and the sales leaders out there. Let me tell you all what you're going to get today. Top discovery questions, of course, how to stay on top of those prospects so that you don't lose the opportunity to close deals faster. And then, of course, follow-up techniques and why they work. So let's get right into it. These are some discovery questions that I want to pick apart. We got a lot of these from our guests today. So Troy, pick it out from whichever one of these you want on the top two. I think those were the two that you submitted, and we had a couple other ones that we'll probably give to everybody in the show notes.
We will choose number one. I think that this one is extremely important, and I love using this. I actually got a very similar worded discovery question from somebody I worked with when I was at Metadata. They said it a bit differently. Take it, make your own twist to it. But I think it is extremely important to understand, hey, if they want to negotiate, that's totally fine. This is sales. They're going to negotiate. They're going to try to beat you down, get the lowest price they possibly can. You got to get something in return, right? You can't just be like, hey, yeah, if you sign by the end of the quarter, we'll give you, like 45% discount. We do that all the time, right? That's tech sales for you. But I love when they're going in for the negotiation, they're asking like, hey, this competitor's cheaper or whatever. Usually when they mention competitor, I always kind of step back and just like, hey, if you're mentioning competitor, that means that we're probably not the technical win. So before we talk about price, let's try to see how we can be better than the competitor, things like that. But when they come about price, I just like to say what needs to happen. If we land on a price, what needs to happen to get your signature? This will give you every single thing that needs to happen. And then best practice, especially if you're working a little bit more of a complex deal, is reverse timeline that. Okay, great. So I know that I need to talk to this person. I know we need to get InfoSec involved. I know that we need to get legal involved. Who do we need to talk to for InfoSec? Who do we need to talk to for legal? Let's get all the people, all the processes, everything that you need on a piece of paper, reverse timeline it, and then make sure that you agree upon a date as well. If this is when these things will happen. So that's one of my favorite discovery questions to ask, especially when you're a bit further along in the sales cycle.
I like that first one there. For those of you that want the recap, the question to ask is, if we land on a price, what needs to happen on your end to get the signature? And I've always said we need to know their buying process and they need to know our selling process. But most times we're in their buying process long before they're in our selling process. And these questions help us so that we can get on the same page there. Sophie, you gave us a couple of questions too. I really like the one that if XYZ says no, then what happens? I think this is like a proactive strike. Why do you use this and when?
Yeah, so I think it's a common question that I hear reps using that I don't think is a great one is, are you the decision maker? Because everybody likes to think that they are the decision maker. It's a closed question and it's easy for them to say yes, so they don't have to go through the hassle of telling you that they're not and then the steps that they need to take to get a decision. So, following on from Troy's question around if we land on price, what needs to happen on your end to get a signature? If they do then start to give you information about other stakeholders that are going to be involved, I like to humanize it and just ask in a very direct way, if they do say no, then what happens? Is it a dead deal or where do we go from there? I also think just on price, that's one of the easiest ways to kind of get rid of a salesperson to just say it's too expensive. So I think a really great question to ask is, if we get the price right, is this going to get over the line? So that if there are any hidden objections, you can try and find them out there.
I love this. There's one that I use on price all the time, and I think Put a 1 in the chat if you let your customer bring up the price first. Put a 2 in the chat if you're the first person to bring it up. I just want to kind of gauge the audience here. We got a lot of 1s, we got a lot of 2s. I see them flowing in. Oh, we got some 3s. I don't know what that means. But, yeah, are you bringing it up together? That's interesting.
They're not closing.
Okay.
They're not closing.
Yeah, we're all closing on the same time. We agree. Let's go. I like some 6s. Let's go. Y'all are just having fun now. Okay, so here's what I say. When they bring up the price and they want to say this is too expensive, what I say is, it sounds like you might have already had an internal discussion about price. Why don't you tell me more about that? And that opens the door so that now they have the burden of discussing their budget. I don't have to say my price anymore or argue my price anymore. They have to tell me what's been discussed. And that's a great question to ask when they bring up that price. Okay, so more discovery questions. Let's kick it off with Troy here. Sounds like things are fine. Why do you need to do something now? This is an interesting discovery question. Is this at the front? Is this after you're already deep into the convo? When do we ask this?
Yeah, for me, if you get enough information on that first discovery call, you could absolutely ask this. And this is a great qualifying question to make sure, hey, do I focus my time here or do I focus my time elsewhere? One thing that I feel like on every discovery call, something that I want to get out of that first call, just to make sure that it's real is, hey, why anything? Why now? And then why us? They can go with every other competitor. It doesn't really matter. Like, we're all pitching the same solution, just a little bit of differentiators and maybe different messaging, things like that. That's just the reality of it. And so I love this question. I use it. I try to always use it on that first call in some sort of way. If it's not this exact question, it's another kind of a way to ask, like, why do you need to do something about this now? I feel like a lot of people, and we even spoke about this, a lot of people will get that surface level pain. Oh yeah, if you're using contact database that doesn't have an amazing data. Yeah, I don't have good data. It's really challenging. A lot of sales rep will just be like, great, bad data. That means it's a qualified opportunity, but there's no reason. Like, why do you need to change right now? What is that affecting? Are you not generating enough pipeline? Are you missing your revenue goals? Or is the board pissed off at you? Are you going to potentially lose your job? There's so many different things that can happen with that data. Yeah, exactly. So I always try to find out the why now on the first call. Just because something's annoying doesn't mean you're going to go spend $50,000 to buy, something to fix that.
It also does not mean it's at the top of everybody at the company's priority list. And we all know there's multiple stakeholders in almost every deal. In the chat, drop the number of stakeholders that you typically deal with in one of your deals. I'm curious now how these people manage all these threads, right? 3 to 4, 5. I see some 6s in here. That's pretty common. I think 6 is pretty common. Sophie, when we talked about competitors, I felt like there was this moment where I was like, okay, almost everybody has discovery questions that are about what's currently being used, what they've tried in the past. And I think we have this terrible tendency to poo on all of our competition. This puts us in a really bad light. We got some newcomers in the room that might be doing this. So talk to me about how you keep it positive.
Sure. So I think when you are talking about your competitors, there's nothing worse than the tone getting sour and it feeling like you're trying to weed out all the negative things about them, because it just puts a negative spin on the conversation and it doesn't make you come across as very sophisticated or confident in your own solution. Because if you were confident, you wouldn't feel the need to poo on your competitors. So whenever I'm talking about anything that could be competition to me being able to sell to this business, whether that's competitors, whether that's a team that are already dealing with this problem internally, whether it's, maybe just not doing anything about it, I try and always use really positive language. So it just feels like it's got a positive tone, which makes me feel more confident as a salesperson. So instead of saying what's missing from what your competitors are doing right now, I like to say, what do you love about your competitors? My competitors. And then I like to say, what would you rate what you're currently doing out of 10? They might say an 8 out of 10. And then you say, okay, amazing. What would make it a 9? And it's just a more lighthearted way of finding out what the challenges are without using language that's negative.
Negative language will often put negative thoughts in our buyer's head. And I feel like if you spin these things more positive, and maybe some of you are reflecting back on how you talk to your prospects now going, am I a negative person? You might be. Maybe go back and watch some of your calls and ask yourself if you can reposition these questions to have a little bit more of a positive spin. Troy, something that you said that caught my attention when we were planning for this is that none of these questions that we're showing today or giving today should be asked in text. I thought that was an interesting point. Why do you think this is the case?
So much stuff gets lost in translation when you send things over email. It's noisy. Honestly, especially when I was working at Proofpoint, I was dealing with like larger deals and things like that. I would just text my champion. I would text the VP. I would text whoever and just be like, do you have 5 minutes to jump on a call? And if it's not a text, it's the same thing over email. You got 5 minutes to jump on a call. I have a quick question. I think that you can actually read their tone. You can read their body language. You can do all of that over a Zoom call, whatever kind of call it is. I'm not going to sit there and text about pricing. I'm not going to sit there and text about InfoSec or legal. That's not how business gets done. And that's also going to stall your deal. If you want things done now, jump on a call, resolve it, and go ahead and go, along with the sales cycle. And, a lot of this competition that Sophie was talking about earlier, that happened a lot when I was working one of the larger deals that I worked. It was very like, hey, I'm not going to answer your competitive questions. I'll throw it in like a digital sales room and you can kind of look through it, but I'm not going to answer the questions over an email. Like we're going to jump on a call and I'll tell you why we're different, what they're great at, things like that. But there's no reason to tell you these things because then you can take that, send it to your competitor, and they just have stuff on you now. So call always, always, everybody.
And I think just on that point, it also really gives you an indication of how seriously they're taking it and how much they value the conversation that you're having with them. Because if they're prepared to put some time aside to actually have a proper conversation with you about it, it's because they're seriously considering it. If they're just fobbing you off over text, WhatsApp, email, then you're probably not actually a contender to win their business anyway. And you may as well save your own time and move on.
Saving
So
time is the
true.
goal for everybody. So if you can
Yeah.
ask questions that save everybody time, you're going to win the game. No question about it. Nobody wants to waste their time, and you certainly don't want to waste yours. I think that people get aggressive when they're using discovery in the wrong way. I think we want to throw things back in our prospects' faces, and this is a terrible habit that a lot of sales reps have. And we're going to talk a lot about some bad habits later on, but I find this to be very true with aggressive reps. Sophie, what can we do about this? How do we correct this? How do we do this correctly? How do we use what we learn?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to light-hearted tone always. And I think the second thing is just gaining an understanding that we think we're the salesperson selling a solution to a prospect. The reality of that prospect's life is that they're a salesperson trying to sell whatever we're trying to sell to them internally. Quite often, they're trying to change something that's the status quo by buying whatever we're selling. They're trying to influence people that are more senior than them within their business. And I think it's really easy to forget that as salespeople. And I think if you just have that mindset, it will stop you from coming across as pushy and make you come across like you realize that you are both on the sales team, on the same team. It's kind of a battle that you're both in together. So I think a mindset shift from the salesperson's perspective can really help with that. I'm definitely been guilty of being very persistent and pushy in my time, but I think there's just nothing worse than because it just comes across like you're just trying to get a deal over the line, and that is the worst thing that you can possibly do.
I feel like that is the big red flag that every buyer feels and runs away screaming. That's when you get ghosted, is when they feel
Mm.
like you just, quote, just, you said it exactly right. You just want to get this deal over the line. They just want my money. That's how it
Mm.
feels. Troy, you have a very specific method that you use for this. Talk to me about
Mm.
that method.
Yeah. I think that we talked about it when we prepped for this, and it was the
Yep.
breadcrumb method that I love
That's right.
using.
Yep.
And this is essentially when you're on a discovery call, whatever it is, right? You're on a call, and let's say it's Tuesday. We'll use today. It's Wednesday, and then the next call is next Thursday. What I like to do is instead of just giving them everything and throwing every single thing in one email, hey, here's next steps, here's action items, here's use cases, here's testimonials. Like, one, they're not going to read it all. Let's just be honest. We want them to, but they won't. And two, like they're going to forget about every single thing or almost everything that you talked about on that discovery call until your next call. And then they're going to scramble and try to find some information before they jump on that call. And at that point, that's not the way I like to do it. So what I would do is if I'm having a conversation on Wednesday, immediately after the call, just send over the summary. Hey, here's what we talked about. Here's the things that we want to cover. Here's your challenges, your basic summary. And then here's action items. And then on the Friday or maybe even the Monday of next week, doesn't really matter. You'd want to send over whatever documentation or anything that would be helpful based on what people said. So if I write a note down that says, hey, Nofi mentioned this competitor. Now I know, okay. Or Nofi, Sophie mentioned this competitor. Now I know okay, I should send something over to Sophie specifically about the competitor. I'm going to do that Monday so she doesn't forget. And then when it comes to Wednesday, I'll send over use cases or testimonials like, hey, here's other companies similar to you and they were facing similar challenges. Here's here's the way that we can help with it, etc. Now you have a summary. You've got great information based on exactly what they said a few days later. And then a few days later, you have a use case, a testimonial, and then you're going to meet with them tomorrow. So you have everything just kind of flowing in at a natural in a natural state. And I did that all the time in enterprise sales, and it was the best method that I could have used.
The breadcrumb method. That was the name of that. If you want to learn more about it, go bombard Troy. He will definitely share it with you. Sophie and Troy both. We're going to drop their LinkedIns in the chat so you guys can go follow on a little bit later on. But if we want to go find them, I'm sure they're easily found. I want to talk about replies because I think replies is what we're all here to do. What are the types of replies that I'm going to get if I start asking different discovery questions, new discovery questions, if I change the way I approach those discovery questions? So let's say we're going to start using some of the ones you've provided here kindly. We appreciate all the value. Sophie, what kind of replies should we be looking for? Is no news good news or bad news? Are they thinking about it and I should be patient, or are they thinking about it so I dropped the ball?
So I think no news is good news, said no salesperson ever, because it's not.
Fair enough.
I know that sounds pessimistic, but no news is not good news. And just going back to Troy's point earlier about always trying to get them on a call, don't give yourself the unnecessary anxiety as a salesperson of moving that dialogue to email, WhatsApp, and letting yourself be easily ignored, because there's nothing worse than that kind of anxiety, that anticipation. Are they going to reply? Have they ghosted me? Someone's put in the chat, time kills all deals. I completely agree with that. If you have that initial discovery and then they set the next call for a month's time, it's because they're just not that motivated to solve the challenge using you as a provider of the solution. No news is not good news. And also, depending on how long your deal cycles are, I think sometimes if you are in complex deal cycles, if you're selling enterprise, for example, like Troy used to, being on the level playing field with your champion and having an agreement where they're going to give you updates and you're going to be very communicative back with them is always really helpful, just so you can keep the momentum going and you can stay visible in their mind.
I like this because it's an absolute. No news is bad news. But I wonder if Troy is going to agree or disagree. Troy, is no news good news?
Yeah, so no, it's bad news. It's absolutely bad news. Now, there has been times where I've had, no news for a month, 2 months, and even max 3 months where I'm like, damn, like I lost this deal, and then it comes back to life. And during those times, I'm just sending over value. I'm not just, hey, I'm following up, or hey, you said this was a problem. Is it not a problem anymore? I'm kind of just, I know, assuming you do decent discovery, I know what's helpful. I know what's not. I know what you care about. Let me go ahead and just drop some nuggets about what you care about over and over. Just sprinkle them there. Again, that's for a longer, complex sales cycle. So yes, no news is typically bad news. And when that happens, people get desperate and then they start sending emails that are just like, you wouldn't want your sales manager to read it, and then you have salesperson breath, and people could just, or commission breath, what they say. People could just smell that through the email. Hey, come on, is this going to be done by this quarter?
I really need this deal.
Please, I need to feed my kid.
We've talked a lot about a lot of different types of questions, budget questions, past questions, other stakeholders in the game. What's the question you typically miss? Do you miss the past experience? Do you miss other stakeholders? I miss a lot of questions. And then when I go back and listen to the call, I'm like, James, that was so silly. Why didn't I ask this question that I know I should ask, right? It's always hindsight is 2020. I want to talk about the mistakes that people make. Everybody in here knows I like to point these out because I see myself in these mistakes. And I think that's what changes behavior in me. So I'm hoping that these mistakes will change behavior in you. We have a couple of top mistakes here on screen. No agenda and calls ending in chaos were the two that Sophie had. And she had a couple other ones that I'll let her talk through. But talk to me about these two mistakes specifically when we kick it off, because I feel like my calls sometimes end in chaos and it's just poor planning on my part. I own it 100%.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier where you said everybody is looking to save time. And that's the case for us as salespeople and also our prospects. So if you're going into a call and not making the absolute most of the time that's allocated and not having a clear plan and setting an agenda at the beginning of the call, and also finding out if there is a hard stop at the end, then you're just going to waste the time, the precious time that you've got with that prospect. I think it's really important with your discovery, depending on which stage you're at with the conversation that you're having, to go in with a clear plan in mind, set the agenda at the beginning of the call and make it very clear that you are in control and that you are going to be the one driving the conversation. Give yourself enough time at the end for those closing moments, any questions, handling any objections, and setting clear next steps. You want to be done with your discovery, I would say, with at least 5 minutes to spare at the end. And another one that's just like a quick thing is, and I used to do this a lot, presenting something once you've done a bit of discovery and then asking any questions or what are your thoughts on that, because that doesn't really lead you to much valuable information. I think it's much better to frame that in a way that feels more open and asking them for something more specific. So, for example, if you've just presented on something after you've done some discovery, asking them something like, how could you see that benefiting your business, rather than just, does that make sense? Any questions? What are your thoughts?
I hate, does that make sense? Can I just say, I hate that question. Does that make sense is such a terrible habit. John Barrows, Chris Merrill, we all talk about this. When I hear somebody say to me in a pitch, does that make sense? Yeah, I interpret it as, are you as smart as me? It just runs all over me. So I would say if anybody's out there and you know that's your like filler thing, that's your transition thing, really make an effort to not use that as a transition. Does that make sense? Of course it makes sense. I do this job every day. Why wouldn't it make sense? That's how people feel.
Yeah.
Troy, you said tight-knit sales cycle, and I immediately thought to myself, I think I'm in people's buying cycle way more often than they're in my sales cycle. So when you talk about a tight-knit sales cycle, what does that mean? How do we hold ourselves, our prospects over the fire, if you will? How do we hold them accountable, if you will, for this cycle that we think is more important than their cycle?
Yeah, so I think this is one again where you can start qualifying what's real and what's not, because if they're not willing to meet very soon after, that's like that whole why now thing I was talking about earlier. Like, why are they needing to solve this right now? That's really important to figure out. So the tight knit sales cycle, when you're jumping off of a call, one, you want to make sure everybody is aligned on the next step. That next step isn't a month out, 2 months out. If it is, it's probably not a big problem. Like a big problem means they need to solve it today and they will find budget for it. That's another thing. Like a lot of people say they lose the budget. Chances are the pain just wasn't big enough. So when I talk about a tight-knit sales cycle, it's really just, okay, did we jump off the call and do we have a call within the next 7 business days? I kind of like to do that. But again, I always like to revert back to like my proof point days where it was like, 40,000 people companies. They have to get 20, 30 different people in the room just to get on a call. And so that does take a little bit longer. But if you're working with, ACVs, 50K, whatever it might be, or smaller companies, even mid-market, just run that tight-knit sales cycle. Get off that call, make sure you have a call in the next few days, make sure everybody agrees to that call. And that's kind of what I mean by that. If you don't, you're just going to kind of lose steam. And I think a lot of sales has to do with momentum. So you just keep building up and I think it'll finally fall into your lap. But that's what I mean.
It's a good explanation when you talk about that tight-knit sales cycle. And for those of you that are wondering why that's a mistake, the mistake is that you don't keep your tight-knit sales cycle. What is it that other people in the deal just get overlooked?
I think because people really take it at face value when the prospect says, so I'm going to go away and have a chat about this internally and we can catch up in a week. And the salesperson immediately thinks, great, they're going to consider this and we've got a call booked in for the next week. So the deal's pretty much done. And that's just not the case. You really can't take that at face value. If they need to go away and have a chat about it, they are not the decision maker. That's just the reality. They might be one of the decision makers, but they're not the person that is going to be able to say yes to this. So you've got to find out who else needs to be involved in the conversation. What does that process of actually getting a meeting with them to talk about it look like? Why would the prospect rather sell it internally versus you being able to sell it yourself, like I'm sure they would do with their prospects? And again, going back to what I said at the beginning, what happens if those people say no? What if they've had calls with other suppliers themselves? So don't take that at face value. It's really easy to do it, but you just absolutely cannot.
Here's the thing to remember that I just want to put the cherry on the top of what she just said for everybody. Sophie's saying, don't believe it. Don't think that they are going to go and be a fighter for you. The truth that most people don't tell you is that even though you have a champion, it does not mean that they are great at selling your solution internally. That's something you have to enable them to do over time and education and more discovery and so on. So it takes a lot to build up a solid champion. Champion is one of the most overused words and labels that we give to people that we talk to, and not everybody is going to make a great champion. John Barrows noted for saying that he defines a champion as someone that has access to budget or can steal budget from another department. And I think that's a really great way to ask your champion if they're even qualified to be the person that carries your torch. Do you have access to budget? Such a simple question, and it's a yes or no. All right, I want to give you guys more questions, and I want our experts to pick them apart. Let's start here with Sophie, choose one of these questions, talk about how you would phrase it if you would change something, and then we're going to talk about the questions that our audience has submitted. I'm really excited to go with those.
Sure. So I'll go for number 10 because I think somebody put a question about that in the chat, saying it's difficult sometimes to or quantify the pain. So how is pain impacting the business? I think, again, going back to something Troy said that was really useful, don't stop at the surface level. If they say that the pain is that they don't have great data, for example, you want to really dig deep and understand why is that a problem and what does that look like from the perspective of revenue that might be causing them to lose. I think we spoke about this on the initial call. I really like the metrics part of Medic, where you're looking to really quantify the problem that they're solving. And not very many salespeople will be doing this. And it does really impress prospects if you can do it well. So just really understanding whatever the outcome of the solution that you're selling is, understanding what that would mean like financially for them if they were to solve that problem. And then also using a little bit of time travel and asking them to articulate themselves. If in 6 months' time you're still in the same place that you are today, what does that look like for the business from a revenue perspective? What does that look like for you personally? To just really get them to say the impact of the pain themselves from like a tangible perspective and a personal perspective.
For those of you that did not know that you would be coming to the Sellbetter show today to learn about time travel, please I have an unlimited supply of flux capacitors, which is what makes time travel possible. Troy, figure out which one of these you want to talk about, dive into it, and then we're going to go to our audience's questions. Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, so real quickly, love Sophie's point. It kind of feeds into number 11 as well. Would the executives agree, right? Yes, this is the business impact, but is this top down, right? Or is this what they're telling you to go do and go solve right now? Is this the biggest problem that the business has? I think nowadays, I'm kind of caveating here real quick, but nowadays that surprised me too, your poll about other stakeholders. I think because nowadays, like there are so many stakeholders involved in buying SaaS, that's why it gets missed. Back in the day, it was budget. Now it's like stakeholders, like who else is involved? The CFO is involved in more deals now. But I think, let me see. One thing that I like is number 13. So why do you think, if I'm selling demo, I guess, like, why do you think demo is the best fit? I like this question and I like it a lot because then it allows you to understand, like, are you the best fit? Because they might just tell you, like, we don't think it's the best fit. Now it's okay. Why? Like, where are we falling short compared to all the other or all the other solutions that you're evaluating? Right. But if they can tell you exactly why they think that you're the best fit for them and they can justify that in the same exact language that they're telling you internally, then I think that you have a really good deal on your hands. Like, just explain. I think it's the best fit because of X, Y, and Z, and it solves the business pains. And of course, the business impact relates to that business pain that they say. I love that question. And I think that it'll give you a good understanding. Hey, we're not going to win this, or we got a good chance.
I think it's a good gauge. We talked about how we gauge people's interest, and I think these questions help us to gauge the interest level and the importance of that problem. To your point, if it's not being a competitive deal, it's probably not that big of a problem in some ways. The one that stood out to me on this particular list was, would the executives agree? And I think you could ask this when they've identified that it is the biggest problem. It's the number one thing on the agenda. You say, oh, would the executives agree with that? You might find there's some dissension around what that priority is. And then you kind of have a good gauge of how important this problem is or how fast the deal will move, which, I'm always looking for the speedy deals. John Foster has this question, and Sophie, I'd love your opinion. What was the watershed moment that made you realize what you're doing now isn't working? Do you like that one? Would you change something? I really like watershed. I think that's great language.
Sorry, I thought he was asking me when I realized that what I was doing in my discovery wasn't
being
working.
discovered by John Foster right here on Sellbetter. So it's amazing. It's a discovery inception.
Yeah, I love it because it feels very emotive. And I do think with our prospects, sometimes a bit of emotive language can help to really bring the problem to life and make the pain feel extra painful in their own mind and in their own language and the way they articulate it. So yes, John, I love that question.
A good one. I really like it. Okay, this is actually really good. Nicole Olson says, what about non-SaaS but consultancies, right? Do you feel like it's the same type of disco questions, or is there some massaging that has to be done if you're not selling SaaS? And for those of you that don't know what SaaS is, it's software as a service. Yes or no, are you working in SaaS? That's the question in the chat right now that I'd love to know. What do you think about Nicole's question here about phrasing when you're not working a SaaS product?
In my humble, short answer opinion, I think it I think that selling consulting services, you can ask questions in the same way.
Sophie, what do you think when you talk about non-SaaS or consultancies? Does the discovery change, alter? Is there a different way to phrase things?
So I just took that as she doesn't work for a SaaS company, but she works for a consultancy. But I don't know if I took that the wrong way.
Yeah, I think that's what she's saying.
That's how I took it.
Yeah, cool. I would agree with Troy. I think the find a methodology that really works for you. And if you don't, I don't sell SaaS, I sell a service. My business is a service-based business. So you're essentially selling yourself. You don't have an amazing product with loads of features to fall back on. So your discovery, from my perspective, needs to be even better so that you're aware of everything and that you impress your prospect even more by doing such an amazing discovery. So I would say it's similar, but it needs to be even better, and just find a methodology that works for you and adapt each part of that methodology to what you're trying to find out.
It's great advice. And when you talk about methodologies, the piece of advice that I would leave people with is there are no silver bullets when it comes to finding the one that works for you. You should learn as many as you can and put them all to use. A, B, C, D, test every methodology that you come across and find the one that is pragmatic. You've heard me say on this show before that pragmatism is the religion of sales. I still believe this, right? If you figure that there are all these different ways to approach your prospects and you learn as many as possible, you've just opened up your total addressable market because you can sell to everybody that gravitates towards all of these different methodologies. So no silver bullets here. Try them all. Got to catch them all. It's like Pokemon, right? This question comes from Jason Ellert. He says, establish an ongoing touch base with your champions on a weekly basis. Is this a strategy? Sophie, let's start with you. We talked about champions earlier. We all define champion very differently. Are you checking in with your champion, randomly, or is this like timed? Do you have like constant tasks coming your way?
Yeah, without sounding too militant about it, at the beginning of the relationship, I do like to set the tone and say, until, this deal gets done or until we get cross the line with this, it's really important that we communicate with each other as much as possible so that no time is wasted and we save both of ourselves the heartache of going back and forth, not being able to get in touch. So let's agree, how do you best like to communicate with salespeople? Is it on Slack? Is it WhatsApp? Are we going to schedule weekly calls to just make sure you've got that agreed relationship and style of communication moving forward?
Yeah.
But I think Troy will probably have a good answer to this from his breadcrumb days.
Let's find out. Troy, put a 1 in the chat if you're planning on using that breadcrumb strategy. I like the name of that. I think that's probably something I'm going to start doing.
Everybody better do one. So I think that I like to talk to champions, even with these longer sales cycles that I do. I like to talk to them at least weekly just to gauge like what's going on. What are we missing? What's being worked on right now? I never had a strict Wednesday, 12 p.m. I'm going to text Jeremy because he's my champ. Like I never had that. It was mainly like I'd be going through my Salesforce opportunities and I'd be like, okay, cool. I need to check up with this deal. I would do that like every morning. I would check up with this deal. I haven't talked to them in about 4 days. I'm not really sure what's going on over there. And I would shoot them either a text or an email. When it comes to, I like texting my champions if they will let you. The worst that they can say is no. There's 2 ways that I get it. First way is I just ask, hey, the inbox is noisy. Do you mind if I text you on important matters? Sometimes they say yes, and I do that. Other times is a lot of times, especially if you're going enterprise, a lot of times people just put their number and their signature. I don't know if it's like a enterprise thing versus a small biz. I don't see it a lot with the startups that I work with now, but all that to say is when they would email me and I'm out and about, I'm like, hey, just got your email. We'll respond to it as soon as I get home. And I just text them. And that's it. Like I have your number now. Now we're kind of on a texting basis. You didn't allow me to, but it's not like I'm overstepping by any means and it's being helpful. So those are the 2 ways that I like to get on a text level relationship, and constant communication with the champion, I think, is really key.
That is a ninja move. I want to give y'all my champion / text ninja move. So this is how I roll, right? When I'm on the Zoom, I'll open up the chat and be like, let me give you my cell so you can hit me anytime. If you shoot me a quick text, I'll save your number. That way, if you call me, it'll actually ring. Because people block unknown numbers from ringing on their phone. So once they text you, they typically text you their first and last name. You create the contact in your phone right there on the Zoom. And before you know it, you're buddies, right? You're like sending them memes and, all kinds of like screenshots, funny stuff, right? It just helps with discovery long term. Last question here. William Geller says, do you ask personal questions. What would it mean to you personally when this project succeeds? That's a good question. I think it's twofold, though. It sounds like it's a personal question that's related to the Valprop, but I think, do you ask personal questions about what they did last weekend? Sophie, quick answer.
Yeah, use your emotional intelligence based on the prospect. I would frame it in a way of saying, if this project succeeds, how would your life be made easier personally?
Yeah.
Just to get them to think of it from the perspective of their own day to day. But yeah, I do like that, to be honest. I think selling is very personal and human now. So why not?
Not bad at all. Troy, personal questions, how do you phrase them? Are they tied to the Valprop? How do you do it?
Yes, and I like the way that question was phrased. Yes, if you can tie some sort of personal emotion to the deal that you're working, like that's huge, and it becomes much more of a person to person versus like a business relationship, which is awesome. That's a great way to move deals along. Quick story: one of the first deals I ever closed, they were talking about like how they've tried everything to solve this problem, they can't figure out how to solve it. And I was selling cybersecurity at this time, and this is a Sandler move, to be honest. But I was like, honestly, like that's extremely frustrating. How did that make you feel? And he was like, he paused and he goes, it makes me feel like a failure. And I'm like, boom, done deal. I don't know. I love the personal questions. If you can tie some emotion to it, great. As humans, we're emotional by nature. That's just how it is.
It's the way it is. I'll tell you, if you can make it organic, it's even better. I have a pool
Mm-hmm.
table right behind me, and a lot of folks will start off by saying, "Oh, is that a real pool table? Is that a real background?" And I'll say, "That's right." And I'm hoping by the end of this call, we can set up my next shot. And people love that little nugget right there. It's such a good win. I want to thank you both for coming out, sharing your wisdom, being able to give us all these great discovery questions. I'm sure a lot of folks are going to get a lot out of it. I'll see everybody tomorrow.